In a small town at the far end of the eastern United States, where winter was not only bitterly cold, but seemed to linger as if it had no intention of leaving, a 14-year-old black boy named Jayden Clark was pedaling a battered old bicycle through snow-muddied streets. No one knew who his parents were, and no one asked. They only knew he lived in a cramped attic room and did whatever work people offered, so long as it earned him a few coins to trade for a place to sleep where the wind didn't scream through the cracks in the walls. That bicycle had once belonged to his mother, a woman who used to work in the hospital kitchen, who had passed away 3 winters ago. Jayden never rode for fun. Every turn of the wheel was a day without hunger, a night not spent shivering outside after the landlord locked the door over a missed payment. The rear seat had once held a basket of flowers, now replaced with a plank of wood tied down with rusty wires to carry deliveries. The chain groaned with every acceleration, like the snarl of time chasing right behind him. That afternoon, the wind began to shift, not violently, just creeping along the collar, crawling down his spine. Jayden had no gloves, and his only jacket had been worn down so much that it no longer revealed its original color. But he didn't complain. He had one last delivery, a small box of medicine that needed to be dropped off before 8 p.m. He'd have enough for a week's rent if he made it. If he didn't, by morning the key would no longer fit the lock. He pedaled faster as the last sliver of sunlight faded from the street. One by one, streetlights flickered like weary hearts trying to stay lit for those hurrying home. But Jayden had no home to hurry to. For him, home was anywhere he wasn't chased away, wasn't hungry, and where no one looked at him like he was a mistake. And then at the end of the street, where broken sidewalks curled around an old bus stop, he saw her. Her silver hair fluttering, an older woman stood alone beneath a dim lamp. No one noticed her. People walked by carrying grocery bags, eyes glued to their phones without a glance. But Jayden stopped. Even though the clock in his head screamed that each second wasted was a second too late. There was something in the way she stood that wouldn't let him turn away. Not because she looked frail, but because she looked lost, as if the world had forgotten she existed. And in that moment, as snowflakes settled lightly on his lashes, Jayden, a boy orphaned and once lost in his own life, understood sometimes people don't need to be asked, "What do you need?" They need someone willing to stop. Jayden stopped his bike a few steps away, hiding behind a frozen lamppost, quietly observing. She stood there, wrapped in a worn beige wool coat, her silver hair tangled beneath a faded white knit hat. She clutched an old dark brown leather bag, her wrist trembling slightly whenever the wind passed. Each time a car drove by, she turned hopeful eyes watching, but none stopped. Her lips moved, saying something, perhaps the name of a bus route. Number 12. Willow Lane, or Garden Street. But this stretch of road hadn't seen a number 12 bus in months. Jayden knew that. He had delivered packages all over town. He knew the schedules like the back of his hand. Route 12 had stopped running last summer. Maybe she was confused. She stepped forward half a pace, then retreated again, her frailty showing through. Each gust of wind made her shiver, not just from the cold, but as if the whole world around her was no longer right, not the time, not the place, and maybe not even herself. Jayden looked down. He knew he should go, make the delivery, then come back. But his feet wouldn't move. His heart beat faster, not from fear of being late, but from realizing something: this woman had no home to return to, just like him. Only she no longer remembered the way. A strong gust swept through, carrying dry leaves, and a whisper from the woman, "I missed it. Or maybe it missed me." Her voice wasn't to anyone, particularly herself or someone long gone. Jayden gripped his handlebars tightly. He took a breath, then stepped gently forward. I'm sorry. Are you all right, Mom? His voice was soft and cautious, as if afraid she might shatter like thin glass if he spoke too loudly. She turned. Her eyes were cloudy but warm. She looked at him as if trying to recall a face from long ago. I'm waiting for bus 12, but it never comes. Maybe I got the wrong street. She let out a faint laugh, as fragile as cracking glass. Where are you headed? Jayden asked. She rummaged through her bag. Nothing inside but a handkerchief, a chipped lipstick, a few coins, and an old bus stub from 2 days ago. No address, no card, no phone. But then Jayden noticed a silver chain beneath her coat. He leaned slightly and saw a silver oval pendant engraved in cursive, Eleanor Rose, 48 Oak Hill Drive, North Side. He held his breath. He knew that place, nearly 2 hours away by bike across 3 hills, a small bridge and a rugged path near the northern woods. Not a place elderly folk strolled to, not a place people got lost in, and not a place where buses passed. Jayden checked the time at 7:16 p.m. He might have made it if he had turned around and finished the delivery. But if he took her home, he would certainly be late. And tomorrow, he'd be sleeping outside. He looked into her eyes again, eyes that had seen a lifetime now clouded by everything lost. But beyond that haze, he saw what everyone else had overlooked, a fragile but lingering hope that someone wouldn't abandon her. Jayden tightened his grip on the handlebars, then nodded, forcing a smile. 48 Oak Hill Drive, huh? That's far, but I think we can make it. And so under the dusky purple sky, beside flickering streetlights and the wind that was beginning to rise, a 14-year-old boy decided not for himself, but for someone who needed the simplest thing of all to be seen. Jayden removed the delivery bag from his handlebars, set it down on the rusted bench by the bus stop, and wheeled his bike next to Mrs. Eleanor. He said nothing more, quietly took off the thin scarf wrapped around his neck, and tied it to the back seat as a makeshift cushion. I'm sorry the seat's not very soft, but I'll ride slow, he said gently. He then took off his old threadbare coat, his hands trembling as he draped it over her shoulders. He gently lifted her hand to rest on his narrow but sturdy back. Eleanor settled onto the seat and murmured something about her nephew with dirty sneakers and how he used to ride like this too. Jayden didn't correct her or explain who he was. He tightened the straps of her coat around her and began to pedal. The bike shook with every crack in the road, the chain groaning as if it resented every turn. But Jayden didn't mind. He kept his gaze forward, his head tucked low to shield his face from the biting wind, and his legs pushed steadily. At first he rode slowly so she could adjust to the rhythm. But once they left the neighborhood, he began to speed up. Every meter stretched the tired fibers in his legs. But he didn't complain. He thought of his mother, how she once rode this bike through the snow to deliver medicine to patients no one else visited, how she came home soaked yet smiling. Now the bike belonged to him. And for the first time, it wasn't taking him home, it was bringing someone else there. Eleanor started humming a tune, its words lost to time, perhaps a lullaby or a melody she misremembered. Jayden didn't interrupt. Whenever she asked, "Are we there yet, dear?" he would reply, "Almost just one more hill," even though he knew there were at least 3 more, and a bridge, and a long gravel slope behind the abandoned factory. She said, "When I was young, I rode my bike to school, but never this far." Jayden chuckled softly. "I've never ridden this far with someone sitting behind me." They both laughed, not because it was funny, but because someone had answered them with gentle honesty for the first time in the cold. They paused at a small roadside gas station when the wind turned sharp as blades. Jayden pulled his last dollar from his pocket and bought hot tea. Eleanor insisted on returning it to him, saying, "You need it more than I do. Young people freeze. They lose their dreams." Jayden said nothing. He took a sip, then handed the cup back to her. "You keep the sweet part." It was the first time in his life that Jayden realized not all older adults grow bitter. Some grow gentle enough to warm a frozen soul. That night, as they crossed a wooden bridge, covered in mist under a faint moon and the distant hoot of an owl, Jayden felt something shift. It wasn't cold. It wasn't fair. It was belief. Belief that whatever lay ahead, he had made the right choice when he chose to stop. From then on, every turn of the bicycle wheel wasn't just taking Eleanor closer to her home. It was taking Jayden closer to a different kind of life. One where he wasn't just the orphan boy on deliveries, but someone who knew why he existed. Near 9 p.m., Jayden's bike began to slow on the final hill leading to the top of Oak Hill. His legs were exhausted, his knees buckling after more than 2 hours of riding through bone-deep cold. Every pedal stroke thudded like a heartbeat in his chest. Not from fear, but from knowing he was moments away from fulfilling a promise no one had asked him to make. The house came into view, dim yellow light spilling from the second-floor windows like melted candle wax into the silent night. The once white iron gate had faded ivy crawling up both sides like old hands holding the past shut. Jayden braked gently, helping Eleanor down, one hand still on her back, as if afraid she might break at any moment. "We're here, Mum," he whispered, his voice barely louder than a breath. Eleanor looked up, her clouded eyes suddenly clearer, like fog wiped from a window. "Yes. Home." Jayden guided her through the gate and up to the porch steps. He knocked once, no response. He knocked again, louder this time. A tense silence followed, like a string pulled too tight. Then the latch clicked open and a worried face appeared behind the door. An older man in pajamas, lines of anxiety etched into his face. But when his eyes landed on Eleanor, his whole expression crumbled into astonishment and trembling relief. "Miss Eleanor, good Lord, where have you been? We called the police, the hospitals," he choked, stepping forward and clasping her hands. Eleanor smiled and turned to Jayden. "You brought me home, dear. I'm still here, aren't I?" Jayden stepped back, unsure. The man, likely the housekeeper, turned to him, his eyes brimming. "Boy, thank you. Thank you for bringing her back. Please come in. You're freezing. Let us make you something hot to eat. We'll call a car to take you home." But Jayden shook his head. "I need to go back. There's something I still need to do." Not because he wanted to leave, but because he knew if he stayed, he might be unable to, and because he didn't yet understand that the place he had called home, that tiny attic room, was probably no longer his. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small scrap of paper, the back of an old delivery receipt on which he'd scribbled a phone number in crooked handwriting. "If she needs anything else, just call me." He handed it over, then quickly turned away before anyone could say goodbye. The wind hit his face again, as if reminding him that the road downhill wasn't going to be any warmer. By the time Jayden reached the rundown boarding house, it was nearly 11 p.m. The hallway lights were out. Darkness clung to the walkway, and a cold silence was waiting beneath the distant hush of traffic. He parked his bike, stepped onto the porch, and reached into his coat pocket. No key. He searched his pants, every pocket of his jacket, and found nothing. He turned the pockets inside out and checked the torn lining, but there was still nothing. A coldness crept in, not just through his fingertips and soles, but into his chest. He bent down and saw it. A loosely tied plastic bag was left at his doorstep. Inside an old shirt, a torn towel, and a cracked phone charger. On the door, a thick, unforgiving note was taped. "Past due. Locks changed." Jayden stood there, one hand still resting on the bike handlebar. Wind howled between the buildings, lifting the paper at his feet. His eyes didn't well with tears, but inside the cold wasn't in his skin anymore. It had sunk into his belief, slammed shut like the door in front of him. He didn't curse, didn't pound the door, didn't cry. He simply turned around. He started pedaling back down the road from where he came. Nowhere to go, no roof overhead. But he kept riding because he knew this much: if he stopped, the cold would devour his heart. Jayden rode on through the night, not knowing where he was headed, only that he couldn't stop. Each rotation of the worn-out bicycle wheel was a low note of quiet surrender, tired, wordless, and hollow. The cold had found its way into his collar, knees, and knuckles, but he didn't complain, because he knew silence was the only way not to collapse. The clock passed 11:30 when Jayden turned down an alley behind Johnson's Market, the place he often called the last fallback. The little grocery wasn't home, but its owner, Mr. Gregory Johnson, had more than once quietly slipped Jayden a piece of stale bread or a bottle of water too close to its sell-by date. No one knew, no one needed to know, and Mr. Johnson had never asked. Jayden parked his bike next to a dumpster and walked to the small metal door at the back of the store, where a sliver of light glowed from the crack like a whisper. He knocked 3 times, not loudly, but enough to echo in the night. Within 10 seconds, the lights flicked on inside. The lock clacked, the door creaked open, and Mr. Johnson stood in a wool robe, holding a steaming mug of coffee. He looked at Jayden for a long moment, a deep, quiet stare. No questions, didn't make rent, he asked, not with blame, not with pity, just a quiet truth. Jayden nodded. Mr. Johnson glanced up at the sky for a second, as if asking permission from someone higher, then stepped aside, holding the door open. The storage room doesn't have heat, but it's dry. There's a fold-up bed in the corner. Don't touch the wine crates, and don't freeze to death in there. Jayden smiled, not because the words were kind, but because their bluntness right now was the kindest thing he'd received in a long while. "Thank you," he said softly, bowing his head and stepping in. The storage room was packed with cardboard boxes, sacks of rice, and fallen orange peels scattered across the floor. The scent of paper fruit, vines, and dust blended into something familiar, something Jayden had slowly recognized as almost home. In the far corner sat an old foldable bed, a thin mattress, and a blanket that looked like someone's forgotten jacket. Jayden wrapped himself in the blanket, didn't take off his coat or remove his shoes. His hands trembled from the cold as he pulled the cover up to his neck, but his eyes slowly closed. For the first time in weeks, he felt safe. Not because the room had a lock, not because the light was warm, but because in a place no one cared about, a door had opened without conditions. And as Jayden drifted off into a dreamless sleep, he still remembered the hum of the bike on the road back from Oak Hill, the smell of hot tea floating through the wind, and Mrs. Eleanor's whisper behind him. "You made me feel like I still existed." In the cold, damp storage room, that memory became the flame that kept his heart warm until morning. The dawn came slowly the next day, as if even the sky wasn't ready to wake up. The first light rays pushed through the dusty window pane, falling softly across Jayden's curled-up body beneath the thin blanket. His limbs ached from the hard bed or the freezing night, but from every stretch of road still etched in his joints. He opened his eyes, not because he was rested, but because of a familiar sound, the heavy shuffle of Mr. Johnson pulling open the shop's front gate. Jayden sat up quickly, folded the blanket with reverence, and crept into the storefront. Mr. Johnson was already dressed in an apron around his waist, with a dust cloth at the cashier counter. He didn't look at Jayden, just placed a ripe yellow banana and a steaming cup of coffee on the counter. No words, just a short nod as if to say, eat. No explanation needed. Jayden picked up the banana. His hands were still cold. His heart still beat slowly. He said nothing, just stood silently by the window, eyes watching the street as it cautiously stirred to life. Steam rose from car hoods. Kids with backpacks trudged to school, birds pecked at breadcrumbs on the eaves, and another day like any other, until a sleek black sedan appeared at the far end of the street. Not the kind of car you'd typically see in a poor town like this. It moved like it wasn't driving, but being drawn by an invisible thread directly toward Johnson's Market. The car came to a smooth, silent stop. The door opened. Out stepped a tall, elegant man wearing a light brown overcoat and spotless leather shoes. Every step he took seemed detached from the dusty world around him. In his hand was a small, crumpled piece of paper, one Jayden recognized instantly. The old delivery receipt on which he had scribbled his phone number after leaving the Oak Hill estate. The man glanced around the store. Then his eyes landed on Jayden. He stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. The air in the shop seemed to slow down, as if the entire space was holding its breath. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep, clear, with a kind of echo from somewhere far away. "I'm looking for someone named Jayden Clark." Jayden turned instinctively, standing upright. "I'm Jayden." The man's face relaxed, relieved. "I'm Charles Bennett. I work for Mrs. Eleanor Rose. She sent me to find you." Jayden froze. Charles stepped forward, his voice gentler. "She remembers everything, every detail. She said you didn't just bring her home, you helped her remember who she was. She wants to thank you. In person." Mr. Johnson, standing behind the counter, paused mid-sip of his coffee. He said nothing, just looked at Jayden with eyes that seemed to say, "So it's finally happening." Jayden looked at Charles, then down at the paper in his hand. His crooked handwriting, the thing he thought was meaningless. Just a polite gesture, now a bridge no one expected. Charles didn't rush. He opened the door again and tilted his head slightly, inviting Jayden into a journey with no defined end. "She's waiting, if you're ready." Jayden hesitated. Behind him a dusty storeroom, but safe. Ahead a road he didn't know where it would lead. In his mind, Eleanor's words from the night before echoed, "You made me feel like I still existed." He looked to Mr. Johnson, the man who never asked questions, who now shrugged and said one quiet sentence, "Go. The bed will still be here if you need to come back." Jayden nodded, and when he stepped outside, climbed into the car, and the door closed behind him, something inside him began to open slowly, but firmly. The car glided gently through the quiet suburban roads, passing familiar turns that now looked completely different. In the daylight, the path Jayden had once biked through in the freezing dark now felt peaceful, even warm, as if it were smiling and welcoming him back. Jayden sat silently in the back seat, not saying a word. His old jacket still wrapped around him, hands lightly gripping the strap of his torn backpack, eyes gazing out the window at rows of trees standing still in the soft sun. Inside him a quiet confusion. Part of him wanted to turn back, to return to the storeroom, the thin blanket, the instant noodles. But another part tried to believe he was worthy of what might be waiting at the end of the road. Jayden's heart pounded when the car turned into the gates of Oak Hill Estate. The white iron gates, moss-covered stone path, and ivy-covered walls all looked unchanged. Only Jayden had changed. Charles didn't lead him through the main entrance. Instead, they turned to a side path and entered a sunlit room. In the center of that room sat a woman, Eleanor Rose, by an open window, one hand resting on an old book, the other holding a cup of tea. A breeze gently lifted her hair, And when she saw Jayden walk in, her eyes lit up, and her smile bloomed across her face like sunlight after a long grey storm. "There you are," she whispered, voice trembling. "It's you, the worn-out shoes, the faded coat, that face. I couldn't forget it." Jayden stood still. He didn't know whether to bow, step forward, or say anything. He only mumbled, "I just wanted to ensure you got home safely." Eleanor gently set her teacup down, rose from her chair, and took his hand. Her hands were thin but warm. "No, sweetheart, you didn't just bring me home. You helped me remember why I came back. That night, you didn't look at me like someone who was lost. You looked at me as if I was still someone." Those words made Jayden look down, not out of shame, but emotion. No one had ever said that to him. For 4 years, he had only been the orphan, the delivery kid, the nuisance, never someone. Eleanor sat down again in the wicker chair by the window, her eyes still fixed on him. "I don't know anything about you, but I'd like to. If you don't have anywhere to go, I want to invite you to stay. Not just for a night, but longer if you'll allow it. I have more rooms than I need and no one to share them with. You could change that." Jayden froze. The offer hit him like a wind, shattering every wall he had built around himself for protection. He took a step back, shaking his head, his voice low but firm. "You're kind, really. But I didn't do this to get anything. I don't need charity. I just wanted to make sure you were safe." Eleanor looked at him, unwavering. "And that is exactly why I want you to stay." Silence filled the room. Outside, leaves rustled gently as if nodding in agreement. Jayden said nothing. He didn't nod, didn't refuse, but something inside him cracked open a minor fracture in the ice. A signal that maybe he could trust again. The meeting ended quietly, no dramatic hugs, no tears, no flourishes. But when Jayden left the estate that evening and returned to Johnson's Market, curling up under the old blanket and staring at the wooden ceiling, he didn't feel cold anymore. For the first time in years, he felt seen. Not for what he lacked, but for what he carried: kindness, the quiet strength of silence, and the light of someone who knew how to stop for others. The next morning, the market opened as usual. The smell of diluted coffee, the gentle chime of the bell each time a customer entered, and Jayden still in his worn-out shoes and faded coat, stacking canned goods on the shelves like every other day. His hands moved, but his mind was still like the surface of a quiet lake. He had returned from Oak Hill with a strange feeling, not quite joy or sadness, just a sense that the world had cracked open a new path, one he wasn't ready to step onto yet. So as always, he chose the familiar silence work and letting life drift by. Until the bell rang again, not the sharp jingle of a hurried regular, but a soft sound, short and deliberate. Jayden turned and froze. Mrs. Eleanor Rose stood there. No fancy coat, no chauffeur. Just an older woman wearing a pale grey scarf, holding a small bag, standing in the store like she'd always belonged there. Jayden stepped out from behind the counter, nervously wiping his jeans with both hands as if brushing off dust that wasn't there. "You came here?" Eleanor smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that came from someone used to giving orders, but rather from someone carrying something sincere. "I hope I'm not making you uncomfortable. I thought about you all night." Jayden stayed silent, barely able to believe what he was hearing. "I know. You're not ready to accept anything," Eleanor continued softly, placing a folded, slightly crumpled piece of paper on the counter, written carefully in blue ink. "But today I didn't come with a proposal," she said. "This isn't a contract, not a deal, just an unsealed invitation. You don't need to sign anything. Just read it if you want. And if not, keep it until the time feels right. Jayden took the paper. Inside, the handwriting slanted and uneven, but resolute, carrying the breath of someone who had lived long enough to write not for persuasion, but from the heart. Dear Jayden, if you need a home, mine has room to spare. If you need a new beginning, I have a small scholarship waiting. If you need quiet, I have a garden no one will disturb. I don't want to take you in. I want one more good soul in a house that's grown too wide and quiet. Step through the gate, and we'll write the rest together. At the end of the letter was a smaller line written in a lighter script, like a whisper: if you still want to return to school, I'll find a way to make it happen. Not because I have money, but because you have worth. Jayden finished reading and didn't know what to say. He looked up at Eleanor, not with the eyes of someone receiving charity, but like someone offering something deeply precious. And in that moment, among the canned beans, the worn floorboards, and the sound of a delivery truck outside something inside, Jayden quietly melted, not because of the scholarship, not because of a private room, but because for the first time someone didn't want to change him. They wanted him to be there. He folded the letter, placed his hand over it, then looked up, no longer avoiding her gaze. His voice was low but steady. I want to come. Eleanor smiled again. This time it was a full smile, not one of triumph but of companionship. Then, let's go home. That afternoon, when the car returned to pick Jayden up, this time not because of obligation, but because of his choice, Mr. Johnson didn't say a word. He just slipped a paper bag into Jayden's hand containing 2 sandwiches and a bottle of water, muttering, "It's time." Jayden nodded, carrying his small backpack with everything he owned, a faded shirt, worn socks, and his mother's old notebook. Not much, but for the first time he carried them not to run, but to begin. As the car turned into the gates of Oak Hill, the western sky glowed a soft orange sunlight stretching long over the stone-paved path. Jayden sat quietly in the back seat, but inside him was a movement unlike before, no longer fear of rejection, but a belief that he was welcome. Eleanor waited on the porch, holding a teacup and a neatly folded scarf. "You're here," she said, with a smile, not overly emotional, not dramatic. Just right, as if he had always been expected. Jayden's room wasn't big, it wasn't luxurious, but the window looked out onto a small garden where morning light poured over rows of lavender. On the desk, Eleanor had already placed drawing paper books and a small chalkboard with a message written in careful handwriting. "You don't need to change, just be yourself." This new life began quietly. Jayden got rest, ate full meals, relearned what he'd forgotten, and spent part of each day walking with Eleanor through the greenhouse. They didn't talk much, but Jayden would be there to catch fallen leaves whenever she bent down to pick them up. Whenever she forgot where the tea jars were, he'd already be holding the right one. One morning in the garden, Eleanor said, "You know, that night I wasn't just brought home, I was brought back, to being a person again." Then she placed a hand on Jayden's shoulder, her eyes gleaming. What if we helped do that for others too? From that question, the Willow Light Foundation was born. Not a big organization, just a house with 2 founders, an older woman who once lost her way, and a boy who once had nowhere to go. The mission was simple: find teens lost in the system like Jayden once was, find elders living alone in silence like Eleanor had been, and build connections so that everyone can be seen, heard, and called by their real name. Jayden wasn't just living there. He co-designed the programs, wrote letters to invite mentors, created the intro videos, and visited the bus stop every week, where his story began to sit and talk to those no one else noticed. He still rode his bike, still wore his old jacket, even though Eleanor had bought him a new one. "I don't need to change how I look," he'd say, "because what needs to change is how the world looks at someone like me. Beneath the front porch, they hung a small wooden plaque carved with the words, "Dignity is not a gift, it is a birthright." And whenever someone arrived, be it a boy kicked out of class for being poor or an older woman from a quiet nursing home, Jayden was always the first to greet them with a smile and say, "I know how that feels." But here, no one is invisible. Late winter arrived with soft golden light, like the earth's way of apologizing after months of cruelty. The bare trees along Oak Hill began to sprout pale green buds. And where it all began, the worn-down bus stop at the end of the street, a boy sat quietly, hand resting on a bike's freshly oiled handlebar. Jayden Clark, now 15, still wore the same old coat, the same scuffed shoes, but his stance was steadier. His gaze was deeper. He no longer pedaled out of fear of cold or hunger. He rode because he wanted to remember. In front of him sat the bench where Eleanor once waited, hands trembling, eyes distant. Today the bench was empty, but in Jayden's heart it was full. Jayden reached into his backpack and pulled out a small cloth pouch. Inside was a wooden plaque, carefully engraved with the words, "Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to stop." He gently hung it on the fence nearby, as if placing a memory back where it belonged. Then he stepped back, looking at it like a whispered message to passing strangers who might be too hurried to notice that some souls are still waiting to be seen. When he returned home, Jayden pushed open the kitchen door and found Eleanor watering her basil plant. Her movements were still precise, but her hands were weaker now, occasionally trembling. Jayden quietly walked over, took the watering can from her, and helped her into a chair. No words were exchanged, just two people who understood each other. "You went to the bus stop again?" she asked after a few minutes of silence. "I did," Jayden replied, smiling. "I put up the sign. Maybe no one will read it, but if even one person stops, that's enough." Eleanor nodded slowly, her eyes slightly red, not from the wind, but from memory. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think this house was a remnant of the past. But now I see. It was the beginning." Jayden said nothing. He just placed his hand gently over hers, the same hand that once gripped his shoulder in the middle of the night, back when she was still lost in her memories. Now they both remembered. They remembered that night. They remembered why they met. They remembered what it felt like to be genuinely seen in a world that was always rushing, always cold. The official founding date of the Willow Light Foundation was marked as the day Jayden brought Eleanor home, the day he chose someone else over himself. And that choice opened up a life utterly different from the one he had known. At the community center's quiet but warm launch event, people watched as a young black teenager stood behind the podium. His voice was calm, but unwavering as he spoke. "I used to think I had to stay silent just to survive. But I've learned that when even one person sees you, truly sees you, the world starts to change. Not with money, not with fame, but with quiet kindness." And every year Jayden returns to the old bus stop on the same day. Not to wait for someone, but to become the person who once stopped. Because some people weren't born to walk fast, but to walk at the right time. Some stories don't begin with a choice. They begin with unreturned kindness. And some homes aren't found through an address, but at a glance, through the squeal of bicycle wheels in the night, and a whisper, "Are you all right, ma'am?" Jayden's story doesn't end. It simply becomes a small flame, passed from one person to the next, quietly, without spectacles, but changing everything.